The void did not scream. It hummed with a low, vibrating frequency that Elias Thorne felt in the marrow of his bones. From the observation deck of Aethelgard Station, the stars were not points of light. They were jagged tears in the velvet fabric of the Ouroboros rift. Elias adjusted the collar of his charcoal gray security tunic. His artificial heart, a rhythmic hydraulic pump of titanium and polymer, thumping a steady mechanical counterpoint to the silence of the station. "Checking the perimeter again, Thorne?" The voice belonged to Miller, a young officer whose boots still shone with the annoying luster of an academy graduate. Elias didn't turn. He watched the reflection of the docking bay in the reinforced glass. "The Xylari don't move like us, Miller," Elias said, his voice a low rasp. "They don't breathe, they oscillate. If you're looking for a footstep, you've already lost them. Look for the refraction of light." 50 meters below them, the Xylari delegation moved across the arrival gantry. They were breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. Their bodies were composed of translucent, obsidian-like crystalline structures that shifted through hues of deep indigo and electric violet. They didn't walk so much as glide, their movements dictated by a biological electromagnetism that defied the station's artificial gravity. At the front of the procession walked High Archon Kraxos. He was a mountain of jagged stone, his surface etched with the scars of 1,000 duels. Behind him, draped in a veil of shimmering silver mesh, was Vespera. Even from this distance, Elias could see the golden luminescence radiating from her core, the mark of the diplomatic caste. "They look like they're made of glass," Miller whispered, his hand hovering nervously over his stun baton. "One good hit and they'd shatter, right?" "Try it and find out," Elias replied grimly. "That glass can withstand the pressure of a gas giant's core. They think we're made of wet paper and soft hopes. Don't give them a reason to prove it." The peace talks had been dragging on for 22 days. The Federation of Sol wanted the Xylari's phase-fold technology, the ability to leap across light years without the radiation scarring associated with human warp drives. In exchange, the Xylari wanted the secret to the neural anchor, the human-developed interface that allowed a biological mind to merge with a ship's computer. To the Xylari, who viewed machines as soulless tools, the idea that a human could become the machine was both repulsive and fascinating. Elias led Miller down to the Level 4 conference hall. The air here was heavy with the scent of ozone and the sterile tang of recycled oxygen. Inside the hall, the atmosphere was frozen. On one side sat Admiral Helena Vance, her face a map of lines earned from 40 years of Cold War. Opposite her, the Xylari sat in luminous silence, their bodies casting prismatic shadows on the walls. "Your technology is a crutch, Admiral," Kraxos's voice echoed, translated by the floating spheres near his head into a resonant, metallic English. "You tether your souls to wires and silicon because your flesh is too weak to endure the stars. Where is the honor in a victory won by an algorithm?" Admiral Vance didn't flinch. "We call it survival, Archon. We don't have crystalline carapaces or internal fusion cores. We have our minds, and we have the grit to bridge the gap." Vespera leaned forward, her golden eyes, two spheres of concentrated starlight, fixed on Elias, who stood like a shadow behind the Admiral. He felt a strange tingle in his artificial heart, a momentary glitch in its rhythm. She wasn't looking at his uniform. She was looking at the way his pulse moved the skin of his neck. "And you, guard?" she asked, her voice a melody of crystalline chimes. "Do you feel more like a man or a machine when you plug that wire into your skull?" The room went still. Elias met her gaze, his expression a mask of scarred stone. "The wire doesn't make me anything, ma'am. It's just a tool. I'm the one holding the hammer." Kraxos made a sound like grinding rocks, a Xylari laugh. "A hammer of glass, perhaps. We shall see how long your grit holds when the forge grows hot." The meeting was adjourned an hour later with no progress. Elias was assigned to escort Vespera to the botanical biosphere, a request she had made specifically to see how the soft things grow. The biosphere was a massive dome at the edge of the station, filled with greenery from a dozen human worlds. Earth soil, transported across the void at a cost of millions of credits, held the roots of oaks and ferns. "You miss this?" Vespera asked, gesturing to a small patch of Montana clover. "Every day," Elias said. "But I grew up on a colony where the only thing green was the mold in the air filters. Seeing this, it reminds me why we bother. My people do not grow things, Vespera murmured, her crystalline fingers hovering an inch above a leaf. We resonance tune our structures. We are static. You humans, you are always changing, always dying. It is a chaotic way to exist. It's the only way we have, Elias replied. Suddenly the floor beneath them buckled. A groan of tortured metal echoed through the hull, followed by the banshee wail of the decompression siren. Warning, the station AI shouted. Structural failure in Sector 7. Thermal shields collapsing. Emergency bulkheads engaging in 60 seconds. Elias didn't think. He grabbed Vespera by the arm. Her skin was as cold as a frozen moon, and began to run. Move! If those doors seal, we're trapped in the vacuum zone. The corridor was a chaos of flashing red lights and escaping steam. They rounded the corner to see the massive titanium bulkhead sliding down. Behind them, a plume of white frost was already creeping along the walls, the breath of the void. Two maintenance workers were scrambling toward the door, their faces pale with terror. They weren't going to make it. The door was dropping too fast, powered by hydraulic rams that could flatten a tank. Elias looked at the gap, half a meter. Get through, he roared at Vespera, shoving her toward the narrowing slit. She slipped through with feline grace, landing on the safe side. But the workers were still 10 meters away. Elias didn't jump through. He dropped to his knees in the gap, his mechanical heart redlining, and jammed his arms into the path of the falling door. The impact was enough to shatter bone. His titanium-reinforced forearms groaned under the weight of 300 tons of hydraulic pressure. The world turned into a blur of white-hot agony. Elias! Vespera screamed from the other side. He looked up, his teeth bared in a snarl of pure, stubborn defiance. His muscles tore, his skin split, and his bionic heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. But he didn't move. He held the door. He held the void at bay with nothing but his own broken body. The sound of the hydraulic groan was a living thing, a predatory beast trying to chew through Elias Thorne's spine. Every nerve in his arms was screaming, a high-pitched electric siren that threatened to shut down his brain. His vision began to swim, the red emergency lights of the corridor bleeding into a singular, bloody haze. Through the narrow gap, Elias could see the two maintenance workers. One was an old man named Holloway. The other was a girl barely out of her teens. They were frozen in shock, watching the man-machine hybrid holding back the weight of the universe for them. "Run, you idiots!" Elias gasped, the words bubbling through the blood in his mouth. They scrambled. Holloway went first, sliding under the gap beneath Elias's braced shoulders. The girl followed, her eyes wide as she brushed past his strained chest. As soon as she was clear, Vespera reached through and grabbed her, pulling her into the safety of the pressurized zone. Elias was alone now. The door's sensors were overridden by the sabotage protocol, ignoring the biological obstruction in its path. It wanted to seal. It needed to seal. "Elias, let go!" Vespera's voice was no longer a chime. It was a desperate, jagged sound. "Not yet," Elias growled. He felt his neural anchor activate without his consent. His brain, sensing the extreme trauma, attempted to interface with the door's control mechanism through the haptic sensors in his bionic arms. It was a suicide move. He was trying to hack a 300-ton hydraulic ram with his nervous system. Images flashed through his mind, not of the station, but of the great collapse. He saw the black fires of his homeworld, the smell of burning plastic, the weight of a collapsed ceiling he couldn't lift to save his daughter. Not this time, he thought. Not again. With a roar that was more animal than human, Elias surged upward. His artificial heart gave one final, violent heave, pumping a surge of adrenaline and synthetic lubricant through his system. For one impossible second, the massive bulkhead actually rose 2 centimeters. He threw himself backward into the safe zone just as the door slammed shut. The impact shook the entire station, a thunderous boom that echoed like a funeral drum. Elias lay on the cold metal floor, his arms twisted at unnatural angles, the charcoal fabric of his sleeves soaked in a mixture of crimson blood and blue hydraulic fluid. He couldn't feel his fingers. He couldn't feel anything except the rhythmic, dying thud of his heart. Vespera was over him in an instant. Her golden light was frantic, flickering like a dying candle. She reached out, her cool, crystalline hands hovering over his shattered limbs. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a frequency he didn't recognize. "The calculations. The probability of survival was less than 3%. Why did you stay?" Elias managed a weak, bloody grin. "I never was good at math." He lost consciousness as the medical team arrived, their boots a frantic staccato on the deck plating. 2 days later, Elias woke up in the high-intensity recovery ward. His arms were encased in regenerative biogel casts, and a dozen tubes ran from his chest to a life support rack. The air smelled of antiseptic and the faint, sweet scent of Xylari ozone. He turned his head slowly. Vespera was sitting in the corner of the room. She wasn't using a chair. She was hovering a few inches above the floor, her obsidian skin dull, as if she hadn't resonance tuned in days. "You are awake," she said. It wasn't a question. "I think so," Elias croaked. "Did the workers—" "They are unharmed," Vespera replied. She moved closer, her presence bringing a strange calm to the room. "They have been outside your door for 36 hours. They call you a hero. My people call you a madman." "Most days I'm both," Elias said, trying to sit up. A sharp pain in his ribs forced him back down. "Do not move. Your internal framework is being rebuilt. Dr. Eris said you should have died 40 times over. Your heart, it stopped twice on the operating table." "It's a stubborn piece of hardware," Elias muttered. Vespera leaned over him, her golden eyes searching his. "I watched you, Elias Thorne. I felt your rhythm through the floor. It was not like the machine. It was not like the resonance. It was heavy, like the core of a star. You fought the door not because you were strong, but because you refused to be weak. Is there a difference? To the Xylari, yes. We are born strong. We do not know how to become it. We do not know how to choose it." She paused, her light shifting to a soft, contemplative amber. "I have told the High Council that the treaty must continue, but Kraxos is displeased. He believes your act was a display of human instability, not strength. Kraxos wouldn't know strength if it bit him on his obsidian backside." Elias grunted. "Be careful, guard. He has challenged the Federation to a trial of will. He wants to prove that your grit is nothing more than a malfunction of the flesh." Elias looked at his bandaged arms. He could feel the phantom itch of the titanium rods inside his bones. He knew what a trial of will meant. It was an unarmed duel to the finish, a test of endurance that the Xylari had used for 10,000 years to settle blood feuds. A human hadn't participated in one in 3 centuries. The last one had ended in a closed casket. "And if we refuse?" Elias asked. "The negotiations end. The Riftward territories will be closed to human ships. Your colonies will starve without Xylari trade." Elias closed his eyes. He thought of the 2 workers. He thought of the millions of people living on the edge of the void, depending on this treaty. "Tell Kraxos to sharpen his rocks," Elias said quietly. "I'll be there." Vespera reached out, and for the first time she actually touched him. Her fingers brushed against the skin of his forehead, the only part of him not covered in scars or bandages. Her touch was like a cool breeze on a summer night. "I watched you fight alone against the void," she whispered, so low he almost didn't hear it. "And in that moment, I realized I did not want you to belong to the stars. I wanted you to be mine." She pulled away before he could respond, her form shimmering as she moved toward the door. "Heal quickly, Elias Thorne. The Archon does not show mercy to those he respects." As she left, Elias looked out the small porthole window at the Ouroboros Rift. His artificial heart gave a strong, steady thrum. He was a man made of broken parts, held together by wires and memories. But as he flexed his numb fingers inside the gel cast, he knew one thing for certain. The Xylari were about to learn that humans didn't need to be made of stone to be unbreakable. The recovery ward of Aethelgard Station was a tomb of white light and the rhythmic, mocking hiss of the medical ventilators. Elias Thorne lay pinned to the bed by the weight of his own survival. Every time he closed his eyes, he wasn't in the clean, sterile safety of the infirmary. He was back in the red-choked dust of the New Haven colony 24 years ago. He could still smell the scorched ozone of the atmosphere scrubbers failing and hear the sound of the sky breaking open as the orbital bombardment began. "You're redlining again, boss. Take a breath before the machine starts screaming. Elias opened his eyes to see Miller sitting at the foot of his bed. The kid looked like he hadn't slept since the bulkhead incident. He was fidgeting with a small brass coin, an old-world relic, flipping it over his knuckles with practiced anxiety. "I'm fine, Miller," Elias croaked, his throat feeling like he'd swallowed a handful of dry gravel. "Just thinking. Thinking is what gets you in trouble. The docs say your blood pressure is high enough to pop a gasket. You held back 300 tons of titanium, Elias. Normal humans don't walk away from that. They get scraped off the floor with a spatula." Miller leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The rumor mill is going nuts. Half the station thinks you're a secret cyborg project from the Soul Defense Force. The other half thinks you're just too damn stubborn to die." "I'm not a project," Elias said, glancing at his arms. The biogel cast had been removed, revealing skin that was a patchwork of angry purple bruising and the dull metallic sheen of the subdermal reinforcements. "I'm just a guy who knows what happens if you let the door close." "Yeah, well, that guy just earned us a front row seat to a funeral," Miller muttered. He looked toward the door, ensuring no medical droids were eavesdropping. "Archon Craxos is pushing for the trial of will. He's calling it a calibration of intent. Sounds like a fancy way of saying he wants to turn you into a puddle of jam in front of the whole delegation." Elias felt the familiar heavy thrum of his artificial heart. It didn't beat with the erratic flutter of fear. It pulsed with a cold, mechanical certainty. "He's a soldier, Miller. In his head, if he can break me, he breaks the Federation's leverage. He wants to prove that our grit is just a technical glitch. If I don't show up, we lose the trade routes. If I lose, we lose our dignity. It's a rigged game." "Then don't play it," Miller snapped. "You're KIA in spirit if you walk into that arena. Those Xylari, they don't have muscles like us. They're made of focused energy and obsidian. It's like trying to box a landslide." "I've boxed landslides before," Elias said, his mind drifting back to New Haven. In his memory, he saw himself as a 19-year-old recruit, pinned beneath a fallen support beam in a collapsed bunker. He had stayed there for 36 hours, holding up a piece of debris so a group of civilian children could crawl through a ventilation shaft. He had lost his original heart that day, crushed by the pressure, but he hadn't let go until the last kid was out. That was the day he learned that the body is a liar. It tells you it's finished long before the soul is ready to quit. A soft chime echoed at the door, and Vespera stepped inside. Her presence immediately changed the pressure in the room, the air growing cool and vibrant. Miller stood up so fast he nearly tripped over his own boots. "Officer Miller," she said, her voice a shimmering chord, "I would like a moment with the captain." Miller glanced at Elias, who gave a small nod. "Sure thing, ma'am. I'll go. Check the gear. Keep your head on a swivel, Elias." Once the door slid shut, Vespera moved to the side of the bed. She looked different today. The violet luminescence of her skin was muted, replaced by a swirling pattern of deep indigo that Elias had learned signified deep mourning or intense focus. "You have accepted the challenge," she said. It wasn't a question, but there was a tremor in her resonance. "Didn't have much of a choice, did I? Your boss doesn't take no for an answer." "Craxos is a product of our history, Elias. For 10,000 years, the Xylari have survived by being the hardest thing in the room. We don't understand survival through adaptation. We understand it through dominance. To him, you are a paradox. You are fragile, yet you stood where a Xylari guard would have retreated." She reached out, her fingers hovering just inches above his bandaged chest. "He is afraid of you." Elias laughed, a dry hacking sound. "He's 7 feet tall and made of stone. Why the hell would he be afraid of me?" "Because you are unpredictable. You do not follow the laws of physics or biology. You follow something else, something internal." She looked into his eyes, and for a moment, the distance between their species seemed to vanish. "My people have been static for centuries. We have perfected our forms, but we have stopped growing. You humans, you are like the fire in a forge. You are always burning, always consuming yourselves to create something new. It is terrifying and beautiful." "It's exhausting, Vespera," Elias said softly, "but it's all we've got. We don't have a 1,000-year lifespan to figure things out. We have to be right the first time, or we don't get a second chance. The trial is set for 3 days from now, she told him, in the gravity well. It is a neutral zone where the station's artificial pull is doubled. Kraxos will use his weight against you. He will try to crush your lungs before he even strikes a blow. Double gravity, Elias mused. Great, like I needed to feel any heavier. I have brought you something, she said, pulling a small crystalline vial from the folds of her mesh robes. Inside, a liquid of pure, brilliant silver swirled. It is a resonance catalyst. If you consume it before the fight, it will temporarily reinforce your cellular structure. It will make your bones like obsidian for 1 hour. Elias looked at the vial, then back at her. That's cheating, isn't it? If your people found out you gave this to a human, they'd do more than just exile you. They'd probably shatter your core. It is a gift, she whispered, from one soul to another. Elias reached out and gently pushed her hand away. I appreciate it, Vespera, truly. But if I win using Xylari tech, I haven't proven anything. I'll just be another machine. If I'm going to stand in that ring, I'm doing it as a man. Broken parts and all. Vespera's luminescence flared bright gold for a split second, a flash of pure, unadulterated shock. You would risk death for a principle, even when a solution is in your hand? That's the part Kraxos doesn't get, Elias said, his voice steady. The strength isn't in the obsidian. It's in the person who decides to keep standing when the obsidian breaks. If I take that catalyst, I lose the fight before it even starts. Vespera stood in silence for a long time, the silver vial glowing in her palm. Finally, she tucked it back into her robes. I do not understand you, Elias Thorne, but I find that I respect you more than any warrior of my own kind. She turned to leave but stopped at the threshold. Fight well. I find I am not ready to see your light go out. When she was gone, the room felt smaller, colder. Elias looked at the clock on the wall. 72 hours left. He closed his eyes and began to visualize the movements, the way his weight would shift in double gravity, the way his bionic heart would have to compensate for the increased pressure on his lungs. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a cyborg. He was just a man who refused to quit. And as he drifted into a shallow, pain-filled sleep, he hoped that would be enough. The morning of the third day arrived with the cold, mechanical indifference of a station-wide systems check. Elias Thorne stood in the center of the security training bay, his bare torso a landscape of trauma. Scars from New Haven crisscrossed his ribs, interrupted by the surgical ports of his neural anchor and the deep, angry bruises from the bulkhead incident. Miller was adjusting the haptic feedback on Elias's bionic forearms. Calibration is at 95%, Elias. It's the best I can do without a full rebuild. If you push these servos past the red line, they're going to blow. And when I say blow, I mean shrapnel in your elbow blow. Just give me the torque I need, Miller, Elias said, flexing his fingers. They felt heavy, like they were made of lead. I don't need them to last forever. I just need them to last 20 minutes. 20 minutes with Kraxos is like 20 years in hell, Miller muttered. He looked at the diagnostic screen. Your heart rate is already elevated. The double gravity in the well is going to put a massive strain on your pump. If it starts to skip, you yield. Do you hear me? No treaty is worth a flatline. I hear you, kid. Now get out of here. I need to calibrate the anchor. Miller hesitated, then nodded and walked toward the observation deck. Elias stood alone in the silence. He reached for the cable hanging from the ceiling and plugged it into the port at the base of his skull. The world shifted. The neural anchor didn't just provide data, it expanded his consciousness. Suddenly, he could feel the entire station, the hum of the reactor, the flow of coolant in the walls, the vibration of thousands of footsteps. He fed the data into his own nervous system, mapping the physics of the gravity well. He calculated the drag, the atmospheric density, the exact force required to lift a human arm against 2 Gs of pressure. But the anchor had a price. He felt the familiar, oily sensation of the machine's logic sliding into his thoughts, trying to smooth out the inefficiencies of his human emotions. It wanted him to be cold. It wanted him to be precise. Not today, Elias thought, pushing back against the digital tide. I need the anger. I need the pain. That's where the power is. He unplugged the cable, the sudden silence of his own mind feeling like a physical blow. He wiped a trickle of blood from his nose and grabbed his tunic. It was time. The gravity well was a massive, circular chamber at the very heart of Aethelgard. It was normally used for testing hull integrity and satellite deployment, but today it had been converted into an arena. A transparent barrier separated the combatants from the observers. On one side, the human delegation sat in grim silence. Admiral Vance looked like she was attending a funeral. On the other side, the Xylari stood like statues, their bodies casting a kaleidoscope of colored light across the floor. Elias stepped into the chamber. Immediately, the weight hit him. It felt as if an invisible giant had placed a hand on his shoulders and pressed down with all its might. His knees buckled for a split second before his bionic reinforcements hissed, locking into place. Every breath was a struggle, his lungs working twice as hard to draw in the thickened air. Kraxos the Unyielding was already there. The Xylari commander looked like he belonged in the high-gravity environment. His crystalline skin seemed to thrive under the pressure, glowing with a fierce, violet intensity. He didn't wear a uniform, only a simple loincloth of metallic mesh. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, his footsteps making a sound like tectonic plates grinding together. "Human," Kraxos said, the translator spheres carrying his voice through the heavy air. "You look as though you are already collapsing. Is this the pinnacle of your species?" Elias straightened his back, the servos in his legs whining in protest. "We're more like weeds, Kraxos. You can step on us, you can bury us, but we just keep finding a way to grow back through the cracks." "Weeds are a nuisance," Kraxos replied, falling into a combat stance. "They are not warriors. Today, I will clear the garden." "Let the trial begin," the voice of Priestess Yara echoed through the chamber. Kraxos didn't wait. He moved with a speed that defied the gravity, crossing the 10 meters between them in a heartbeat. He swung a massive obsidian fist in a horizontal arc. Elias ducked, the wind of the blow whistling over his head, but the effort of moving so quickly in double gravity sent a spike of agony through his healing ribs. Elias countered with a quick jab to Kraxos's midsection. It was like hitting a brick wall. His knuckles throbbed, and he realized with a sinking feeling that his natural strength was practically useless here. He had to use leverage. He had to use his weight. Kraxos roared, a sound like a glass shattering, and launched a flurry of strikes. Elias was forced into a desperate retreat, parrying what he could and taking the rest on his reinforced forearms. Each impact sent a shockwave through his neural anchor, the machine screaming warnings about structural integrity. "Yield, human," Kraxos commanded, his fist catching Elias in the shoulder and spinning him around. "Your body is failing you. Look at your skin. It leaks. Your bones are bending." Elias stumbled, his vision blurring. He could feel the blood running down his face from a cut above his eye. His artificial heart was hammering so hard he could feel the vibrations in his teeth. "He's right," the machine voice in his head whispered. "Probability of victory, 0.04%. Tactical recommendation, withdrawal." "Shut up," Elias thought. He saw Kraxos charging again, a telegraphed, powerful lunge meant to end the fight. Elias didn't move. He waited until the last possible second, until he could see the individual facets of the Xylari's crystalline eyes. Instead of dodging, Elias dropped to one knee, letting the gravity help him descend. He caught Kraxos's lead foot and yanked upward with both bionic arms, venting the entire reserve of his torque capacitors in a single burst. The sound of his arm servos exploding was like a gunshot, but it worked. Kraxos, caught off balance and heavy with his own mass, was flipped over Elias's shoulder. The Xylari slammed into the floor with a bone-shaking crash, the obsidian of his shoulder cracking against the reinforced deck. The arena went silent. The Xylari observers flickered with a shocked, pale blue light. Elias stood up, his left arm hanging limp at his side, wires sparking where the skin had peeled away. He was gasping for air, his chest heaving, but he was still standing. Kraxos roared in fury, scrambling to his feet. He looked at his cracked shoulder, a mark of shame he hadn't felt in centuries. You dare? You use trickery. You hide behind your wires." "It's not trickery, Kraxos," Elias panted, spitting a mouthful of blood onto the floor. It's called not knowing when to quit. You want to see strength? Look at me. I'm broken, I'm bleeding, and I'm still right here. Can you say the same? Kraxos lunged again, but his movements were different now. He was angry. He was sloppy. He was fighting like a man who was afraid of losing, while Elias was fighting like a man who had already lost everything and had nothing left to fear. They clashed in the center of the ring, a brutal, ugly exchange of blows. Kraxos smashed his fist into Elias's ribs, and Elias felt the bone snap, but he didn't fall. He drove his good elbow into Kraxos's throat, making the alien choke on his own resonance. 5 minutes passed. 10. The Xylari were built for short, explosive bursts of power. They were predators, ambushers. In the grinding, grueling reality of a long-distance fight, their silicon-based biology began to overheat. Kraxos' skin began to glow a dull, angry red, steam rising from his crystalline joints. Elias was a mess. His eyes were nearly swollen shut, his legs were shaking, and he was pretty sure he'd punctured a lung. But his ancestors had hunted mammoths by chasing them for days until the beast collapsed from exhaustion. Persistence was written into his DNA. Yield! Kraxos wheezed, his strikes losing their power. Just fall. Down. Make me, Elias whispered. In the observation deck, Vespera stood with her hands pressed against the glass. Her light was a frantic, pulsing gold. She wasn't just watching a fight, she was watching a revolution. She saw the way the human delegation had stood up, their faces no longer filled with fear, but with a fierce, stubborn pride. Elias Thorne was dying on his feet, and yet he was the strongest thing in the room. Kraxos threw one last, desperate haymaker. Elias didn't even try to block it. He took the hit on his chin, the world turning white for a second, and used the momentum to wrap his good arm around Kraxos's neck in a brutal sleeper hold. He squeezed. He put every ounce of his remaining strength, every bit of his hatred for the void and his love for the stars, into that grip. Yield, Elias groaned, or we both go down. Kraxos thrashed, his claws digging into Elias's back, tearing long furrows in the meat of his shoulders. But Elias didn't let go. He became the machine. He became the bulkhead. He became the very gravity of the room. The Xylari commander's movements grew sluggish. His violet light faded to a dim, guttering purple. His hand reached out, trembling, and tapped the floor twice, the signal for submission. Elias released him instantly. Kraxos collapsed into a heap of cold obsidian, gasping for air. Elias tried to take a step, his heart giving one final agonizing thud, and then his legs simply stopped working. He fell, not forward into a heap, but backward, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. The gravity was deactivated. The weight lifted. As the medical droid swarmed into the chamber, Elias felt a pair of cool, crystalline hands cradle his head. He smelled the ozone and the starlight. You won, Vespera's voice whispered in his mind, bypassing his ears and going straight to his soul. You proved it, Elias. You showed them the heart of humanity. Elias managed one last rattling breath. Told you, I was stubborn. Then the world finally went dark. But for the first time in 24 years, the darkness didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a rest. The silence that followed the trial of will was more deafening than the roar of the gravity generators. It was the sound of 1,000 years of cultural certainty cracking like a sheet of ice. When Elias Thorne eventually dragged himself back into the world of the living, he didn't find a hero's welcome. He found a station on the brink of a nervous breakdown. He woke up 48 hours after the duel. His world was a narrow corridor of pain, blurred edges, and the smell of sterile synth flesh. Every time he tried to take a deep breath, his cracked ribs felt like they were being scraped with a jagged piece of glass. His left arm, the one that had taken the brunt of the servo explosion, was a mess of carbon fiber splints and regenerative wraps. Easy there, big guy. You move too fast and you're gonna spill your guts all over the floor, and I just mopped, a voice grumbled from the shadows of the medbay. Elias squinted. It was Miller. The younger officer looked like he had aged 10 years in 2 days. He was sitting in a hard plastic chair, holding a lukewarm cup of recycled coffee that probably tasted like burnt rubber and regret. Did the treaty? Elias's voice was a dry rasp. barely audible over the hum of the life support rack. "Signed, sealed, and delivered," Miller said, a weary grin breaking through his exhaustion. "Admiral Vance played the recording of you choking out Kraxos on a loop in the briefing room. The Xylari delegation didn't have a leg to stand on. They've agreed to the phase fold exchange. We're in, Elias. We're officially part of the big leagues." Elias let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. The pain flared, but he ignored it. "And Kraxos? He's alive. Barely. His people are calling it a meditative retreat, but between you and me, the guy's core is rattled. He's back in the Xylari sector, probably trying to figure out how a wetware human turned him into a floor mat." Miller leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "But listen, Elias, not everyone is throwing a party. Some of the Xylari, they didn't take the loss well. They see you as a walking insult, a glitch in the natural order. Things are getting twitchy on the lower decks." "Twitchy how?" "The usual grunt-level friction, only worse. Small-scale brawls, systems malfunctions that don't look like accidents. Yesterday, the air scrubbers in Sector 12 went south for 3 hours. Engineering says it was a software bug, but I smell smoke. Someone's mucking with the works." Elias tried to push himself up, his muscles screaming in protest. "Help me up, Miller. I need to see the logs." "Negative, boss. You're zeroed out. Doctor's orders. You try to leave that bed, and the med droids are programmed to hit you with enough sedative to put a mammoth to sleep." Elias growled, a low, frustrated sound. "I'm not sitting here while the station goes to hell. If someone is sabotaging Aethelgard, it's only a matter of time before they go for something bigger than air scrubbers." Before Miller could argue, the door slid open. Vespera stepped inside. Her luminescence was back to a vibrant violet, but there was a tension in her crystalline structure that Elias had learned to read as anxiety. She didn't look at Miller. Her eyes were fixed on Elias. "Officer Miller," she said, her voice a shimmering chord that seemed to vibrate in the very air. "The Admiral is looking for you. Something about a security breach in the agricultural ring." Miller stood up, looking between the two of them. He knew when he was being excused. "Right. I'll go check it out. Don't do anything stupid, Elias. Keep your hair on." Once Miller vanished, Vespera moved to the side of the bed. She didn't speak for a long moment, simply observing the way Elias's chest moved with each shallow breath. "You are a very difficult man to kill," she said finally. Her fingers brushed the edge of the biogel wrap on his arm. "My people have spent the last 2 sun cycles debating your existence. Some believe you are a ghost, a remnant of an ancient warrior race that has been hiding among humans. Others believe you are a machine masquerading as life." "And what do you believe?" Elias asked. "I believe you are a man who has learned how to carry a burden that would crush anyone else," she whispered. "I have looked into your files, Elias. I saw what happened at New Haven. I saw the casualty lists, 2,412 souls lost in a single hour. Your wife, your daughter." Elias flinched. The name of his homeworld was a physical weight on his chest, heavier than the double gravity of the well. "That's ancient history, Vespera. We're talking about now. It is not history. It is the foundation of who you are. You did not survive the trial of will because you are a soldier. You survived because you have been fighting the weight of those 2,000 lives for 20 years. You are a persistence hunter of your own grief." Elias looked away, staring at the sterile white ceiling. "Is that supposed to be a compliment? Because it feels like a curse. I'm tired, Vespera. I'm tired of being the one who doesn't quit. I'm tired of the scars." "The scars are the map of your strength," she replied, her voice dropping to a low, melodic hum. "In Xylari culture, we do not have scars. If we are damaged, we are shattered. We are either perfect or we are gone. Seeing you, it makes me wonder if perfection is a prison. You are broken in 100 places, yet you are more alive than anyone I have ever known." She reached into the mesh of her robes and pulled out a small hexagonal data crystal. "I did not come here only to check on your recovery. I came to warn you. My cousin, Vorak, has left the station." "Vorak? Kraxos' younger brother?" "Yes. He is a fundamentalist. He believes the treaty is a poison that will dilute the Xylari essence. He took 3 long-range interceptors and a dozen warriors with him. They did not clear their flight path with station control." Elias's eyes narrowed. The pain in his ribs suddenly felt secondary to the cold dread settling in his gut. Where did they go? They were last seen heading toward the Ouroboros Rift, near the cooling conduits for the station's main reactor. Elias didn't wait for permission this time. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, the movement causing his vision to flare white. He gripped the edge of the mattress, his knuckles turning white until the world stopped spinning. "Elias, you cannot," Vespera protested, reaching out to steady him. "I can," he gritted out. "If Vorak hits those conduits, the heat exchange will fail. The reactor will hit critical temperature in less than 15 minutes. The thermal shields won't hold. Aethelgard won't just explode, it will turn into a small sun inside the rift. Every human in Xylari on this station will be vaporized before they even know the alarm is ringing." "I will go with you," Vespera said, her light shifting to a fierce, resolute indigo. "He is my kin. This is my shame to bear." "No," Elias said, grabbing a discarded tunic and pulling it over his bandaged torso with a groan. "You're a diplomat. You need to stay here and keep the Admiral and the Archon from killing each other when the lights start flickering. I need someone who knows how to keep the peace." "And who will keep you alive?" Elias managed a grim smile as he found his sidearm in the bedside locker. "Stubbornness, remember? It's worked so far." He hobbled toward the door, his gait uneven but determined. As he reached the corridor, he felt the first tremor. It was subtle, a low-frequency vibration that most people would have missed. But to Elias, who was plugged into the station's heartbeat, it was a scream. The sabotage had begun. The maintenance tunnels of Aethelgard were a claustrophobic nightmare of steaming pipes, humming power lines, and the stale metallic air of a station that was beginning to die. Elias Thorne moved through the shadows like a ghost, his left arm tucked into his tunic to keep it from swinging. Every step was a battle against the sedative still circulating in his blood, but the adrenaline of the looming catastrophe was winning. "Miller, do you copy?" Elias whispered into his comms link. Static hissed back at him for 3 long seconds before Miller's voice broke through, sounding frantic. "Elias, where the hell are you? The med ward is reporting you AWOL, and the reactor core is jumping like a flea on a hot griddle. We've got massive power fluctuations in Sector 19. Engineering is locked out of the manual overrides." "I know. Vorak is behind it. I'm in the crawl space near the primary cooling bank. Tell Admiral Vance to prepare for a manual purge. I'm going to try and bypass the lockout from the inside." "Manual purge? Elias, that's suicide. If you open those valves while the reactor is at 3,000 degrees, you'll be cooked in seconds." "Better me than 10,000 people, Miller. Just keep the Xylari guards busy. Don't let them interfere. This is a human problem now." Elias cut the connection before Miller could argue. He reached a heavy circular hatch marked with the universal symbol for high-pressure hazards. He took a breath, his cracked ribs protesting, and turned the manual crank. The air that hit him was searing. The cooling system was already failing, the heat from the rift leaking into the station's marrow. He stepped inside the chamber, the floor beneath his boots vibrating with the scream of the reactor. At the far end of the gantry, he saw them. 3 Xylari warriors, their skin glowing a violent, jagged red, the color of pure rage. They were working at the control console, ripping out the human-designed interfaces and replacing them with Xylari resonance shunts. They weren't just shutting down the cooling, they were forcing the reactor into a feedback loop. "Vorak!" Elias shouted, his voice echoing in the metallic cavern. The largest of the 3 Xylari turned. Vorak was younger than Kraxos, his crystalline structure more delicate, but his energy more volatile. He hissed, a sound like steam escaping a valve. "The human hero," Vorak said, his translator buzzing with interference. "You should have stayed in your bed of soft fibers, Thorne. You have survived much, but you cannot survive the fire of the sun." "You're going to kill your own people, Vorak," Elias said, leveling his sidearm at the alien. "Vespera is on this station. Kraxos is on this station. Does your purity matter more than their lives?" "They have already been tainted," Vorak spat. "They look at you and they see something worthy. They have forgotten that we are the masters of the light. If Aethelgard must burn to cleanse the Xylari soul, then let it burn." Vorak lunged. He didn't use a weapon. He used his own body as a projectile. Elias fired, the stun bolt splashing harmlessly against Vorak's obsidian chest. But the alien's momentum was too great. They crashed together, falling off the gantry and onto the lower maintenance deck, 10 meters below. Elias hit the floor hard. His vision went black for a heartbeat, and he felt the sickening pop of his shoulder dislocating. He rolled to the side as Vorak's fist smashed into the metal plating where his head had been a second ago. "You are so fragile," Vorak mocked, standing over him. "Every blow I land breaks a piece of you that cannot be replaced. How long can you hold together, human?" Elias scrambled to his feet, his left arm hanging uselessly. He was lightheaded, the heat in the room climbing toward 50 degrees Celsius. He looked past Vorak to the console. The reactor was at 92% capacity. In 3 minutes, the containment field would collapse. "As long as I have to," Elias whispered. He didn't go for Vorak. He went for the neural anchor port on the wall. It was a gamble, a desperate, insane gamble. The anchor was designed for ship-to-mind interfaces, not reactor cores. But the reactor was being controlled by Xylari resonance shunts, and Elias knew that the only way to beat them was to fight them on their own ground, inside the data stream. He slammed his head against the port, the cable snapping into place at the base of his skull. The world vanished. Suddenly, Elias wasn't in a hot, dark tunnel. He was in a sea of white fire. The reactor wasn't a machine. It was a screaming, golden god, straining against its chains. He could feel the Xylari shunts, 3 jagged spikes of purple light, digging into the god's flesh, forcing it to grow, to explode. Probability of survival, 0.0001%. The machine voice in his head droned. Neural degradation imminent. Brainstem temperature rising. "I don't care about the math," Elias roared in his mind. "Give me the cooling valves." He reached out with his consciousness, his digital hands burning as he grabbed the first Xylari shunt. It was like holding a live power line. He felt his own memories being fried. The smell of his daughter's hair, the sound of the rain on Montana, as the Xylari code fought back. In the physical world, Elias's body was convulsing. Vorak was laughing, raising his fist for the final blow. But before he could strike, a blast of indigo light hit him in the back. Vespera was standing on the gantry above, her hands glowing with a power she had never used in public. "Leave him, Vorak!" "Traitor!" Vorak screamed, turning his attention to his cousin. While they fought, Elias was drowning in the reactor's heat. He tore the first shunt loose. The reactor's scream dropped an octave. He reached for the second. He felt a part of his brain go dark. The part that remembered how to play the piano. The part that remembered his mother's face. He traded them willingly. He poured his pain, his stubbornness, and his grief into the interface, using them as a shield against the Xylari code. "You want to see grit?" he thought, his digital voice echoing through the cooling conduits. "This is what it looks like when we don't quit." He tore the second shunt free. The reactor's temperature began to stabilize, but the third shunt was buried deep in the primary containment logic. If he pulled it, the feedback might fry his entire nervous system. He saw a vision of his daughter, standing in the wheat fields of Montana, waving to him. "I'm coming, baby," he whispered in the dark. "Just one more door." He grabbed the third shunt and pulled. The explosion was silent. A wave of white light washed over him, and for a second, Elias Thorne was the station. He felt every bolt, every wire, every breath of every person on Aethelgard. He felt the relief of the Admiral, the fear of the workers, and the sudden crystalline hope of Vespera. And then he felt nothing. Elias woke up in a world that wasn't white. It was gray, a soft, gentle gray. He was back in the med ward, but the machines weren't hissing anymore. The air was cool and smelled of fresh clover. He tried to move his hand, and he felt something. He looked down. Vespera was there, her hand clasped firmly around his. She wasn't glowing violet or indigo. She was a soft, warm gold, a color he had never seen a Xylari take before. "The reactor?" Elias croaked. "Stable," she said, her voice a gentle whisper in his mind. "Vorak is in custody. The treaty is secure. You saved us all, Elias." He looked at his arms. They were covered in new scars, fine, silver lines that looked almost like crystalline structures. He looked at his hand in hers. He couldn't feel his fingers, but he could feel her. I lost some things, Elias said, his voice hollow. In the interface. I can't remember the color of my daughter's eyes. Vespera squeezed his hand, her golden light pulsing in time with his mechanical heart. Then I will help you find new things to remember. You gave up your past to give us a future, Elias Thorne. That is not a loss. That is a gift. Elias looked out the window. The Ouroboros rift was still there, dark and dangerous. But for the first time, it didn't look like a grave. It looked like a beginning. I'm still here, he whispered, a tear tracking through the soot on his cheek. Yes, Vespera replied, leaning her forehead against his. You are still here, and you are not alone. The ghosts of New Haven had finally stopped screaming, but in their place was a hollow, ringing silence that felt far more terrifying. Elias Thorne sat on the edge of his medical bunk, his feet touching the cold floor of the Aethelgard infirmary. The station felt different now. He was no longer just a tenant, he was a part of its architecture. Every time the ventilation fan cycled, he felt a phantom breeze behind his eyes. Every time the reactor pulsed, his bionic heart skipped a beat in perfect, horrifying synchronization. You're staring into the abyss again, Elias. It's starting to stare back. Miller was leaning against the doorframe, looking significantly better than he had a week ago. He'd lost the frantic, jittery energy of the reactor crisis, replaced by a weary, professional alertness. He walked over and tossed a small data slate onto Elias's lap. Admiral Vance wants a full report on the Sector 12 breach. She's also got about 40 suits from the Sol Defense Force breathing down her neck, wanting to know how a security chief with a fried nervous system managed to outmaneuver a Xylari resonance shunt. People are calling it the Thorne Protocol. They want to bottle it and sell it to the Navy. Elias picked up the slate, his fingers trembling slightly. The fine silver lines across his knuckles glinted under the fluorescent lights. There is no protocol, Miller. I just pulled until the damn thing gave way. Tell the suits to find another hero. This one is out of commission. Don't tell me you're checking out now, Miller said, his voice losing its playful edge. The station is still buzzing like a disturbed hive. Kraxos is back on his feet, but he won't speak to anyone except the Admiral. And Vespera, she's been in the observation lounge for 18 hours straight. She's waiting for something, Elias, and I don't think it's a supply ship. Elias looked at his hands. He tried to summon the image of his daughter's face. He knew she had blonde hair, like wheat in the Montana sun. He knew she had a laugh that could brighten the darkest bunker, but the details were gone. The shape of her nose, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, it was all a blur of gray pixels. The neural anchor had taken them as payment for the station's survival. I can't remember her face, Miller, Elias whispered, his voice cracking. I remember the statistics. I remember her age was 7. I remember she died in Sector 4 of the bunker. But the girl, she's gone. I traded her for a cooling valve. Miller went quiet, his eyes softening. He pulled up a chair and sat down, abandoning the bravado of a junior officer. Listen to me, boss. You didn't trade her. You honored her. If you'd let that reactor blow, her memory would have vanished along with every other soul on this rock. Now her memory is part of the reason we're all still breathing. That's not a loss. That's a goddamn legacy. It feels like a hole in my head, Elias said, tapping his temple. A void that the machine is trying to fill with logic and data. I don't want to be a machine, Miller. I don't want to be a Thorne Protocol. The conversation was interrupted by a low-frequency rumble that shook the medbay. It wasn't the violent jerk of sabotage. It was a rhythmic, oceanic swell that made the liquid in the medical vials dance. The lights flickered, turning a pale, ghostly blue. What was that? Miller asked, reaching for his sidearm. The rift, Elias said, his eyes widening. He could feel it in his spine. The Ouroboros rift is waking up. He stood up, ignoring the protest of his lungs. He didn't need a medical droid to tell him what was happening. The sabotage in the reactor had done more than just damage the station. It had created a gravitational wake. The rift, a delicate balance of dimensional anomalies, was reacting to the sudden stabilizing of the reactor like a wounded animal. They ran toward the command center, passing groups of frightened civilians and confused Xylari guards. In the central hub, Admiral Vance was standing over the holographic projector, which showed the Ouroboros rift expanding like an ink blot in clear water. "Status report," Elias barked as he reached the console. Vance turned, her face grim. The reactor stabilization created a localized graviton burst. It's torn a hole in the rift's event horizon. "We're being pulled in, Thorne. The station's thrusters are at 100%, but we're losing ground at a rate of 3 kilometers per minute. "Where are the Xylari?" "They're in their own wing, preparing for an emergency full jump. They want to leave us behind, Elias. Kraxos says the station is a lost cause." "Like hell it is," Elias growled. He looked at the readings. "If they jump now, the energy discharge from their engines will push us deeper into the hole. It'll be a death sentence for Aethelgard." "I have already told them this," a voice said from the shadows. Vespera stepped forward, her light a brilliant, frantic gold. She looked at Elias, and for a moment, the chaos of the command center vanished. "Kraxos will not listen to reason. He sees the rift as a divine judgment. He believes the failure of the treaty has doomed us all." "It's not judgment, it's physics," Elias said, moving toward the primary navigation terminal. "Admiral, if we can link the Xylari phasefold engines to our own gravity anchors, we can create a counterpulse. We can push the station back into stable space." "The systems aren't compatible, Elias," Vance said, shaking her head. "We've been trying to bridge the gap for 3 months. Our tech is mechanical. Theirs is resonance-based. It's like trying to plug a steam engine into a quantum computer." "We have a bridge," Elias said, his gaze shifting to the neural anchor port on the console. "Me!" Vesper gasped, her light turning a panicked shade of indigo. "No, Elias! You barely survived the reactor. Your neural pathways are already frayed. If you try to bridge a phasefold engine, the feedback will erase everything that is left of you." Elias looked at her, then back at the expanding blackness of the rift on the hologram. He thought about Miller, about the 2 workers he'd saved, about the thousands of families sleeping in the residential rings. He thought about the blonde-haired girl whose face he couldn't see anymore. "I've already lost the past, Vespera," Elias said softly, "but I'm not going to lose the future, not while I'm still standing." "There must be another way," she pleaded, her crystalline fingers gripping his scarred arm. "There isn't," Elias said, his voice steady, "but I can't do it alone. I need the Xylari resonance to stabilize the pulse. I need you to be the other side of the bridge." Vespera went still. The golden light of her core pulsed slowly, a rhythmic hum that filled the room. She looked at the humans around her, the small, fragile, stubborn creatures who refused to accept the inevitability of the void. "I have never merged with a biological mind," she whispered. "It is forbidden. It is the ultimate taboo of my people." "Forget your people for 10 minutes, Elias said, his eyes burning with a fierce, human determination. "Be a person. Help me save our home." Vespera took a long, shuddering breath of recycled air. "Then we shall burn together, Elias Thorne." The heart of the phasefold was a cathedral of light located in the Xylari quarter of the station. It was a massive, rotating sphere of obsidian and liquid silver, humming with the power of a captured star. Kraxos stood at the entrance, his warrior guards flanking him with drawn energy pikes. "You bring the human here to desecrate our holiest machine?" Kraxos roared, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "Have you lost your mind, Vespera? This is the end of all things. Let us die with honor." "Honor is not found in a grave, Kraxos," Vespera replied, her light standing tall and bright against his violet rage. "Honor is found in the fight. This human has shown us that the flesh can endure more than the crystal. If you will not help us, get out of the way." Elias stepped forward, his breathing ragged. He was wearing a specialized harness, the cables of his neural anchor trailing behind him like the tentacles of some mechanical beast. He looked at Kraxos, his one good eye fixed on the Xylari commander. "I'm going to save your people, Kraxos," Elias said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Whether you like it or not. Now move, or I'll find out if your skin is tougher than a security stun bolt." Kraxos glared at him for a long, tense moment. He saw the scars on Elias's arms, the silver lines of the reactor burns, and the raw, unyielding will in his gaze. Slowly, with a sound of grinding stone, the Archon stepped aside. "If you fail," Kraxos muttered, "the explosion will be seen from the home world." "Then don't blink," Elias shot back. He and Vespera approached the central console of the phase-fold engine. It was a pool of liquid silver that reacted to thought and frequency. Elias sat in the interface chair, his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt a moment of pure, cold terror. He was about to plug his mind into a star. "Miller, you there?" Elias whispered into his comms. "I'm here, boss. Standing by at the gravity anchors. Just give the word and I'll flip the switch. But Elias, come back, okay? I don't want to be the one to tell the Admiral you turned into a light bulb. Keep your chin up, kid. Thorne out." Elias looked at Vespera. She was standing opposite him, her hands hovering over the silver pool. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I am afraid," she said simply. "But for the first time in my life, I feel awake." Elias plugged the anchor cable into the base of his skull. The world didn't just vanish, it shattered. Elias was thrust into a landscape of pure geometry and screaming light. He was no longer a man, he was a series of vectors and equations. He could feel the phase-fold engine, a massive, swirling vortex of energy that wanted to expand, to consume, to fold space until there was nothing left. "Warning," the machine voice in his head shouted, sounding more human than ever. "Neural load at 400%. System failure imminent. Memory sectors collapsing." Elias ignored the warnings. He reached out with his mind, searching for the connection to the station's gravity anchors. He found them, the mechanical, clunky human machines that were trying to hold on to reality. He tried to pull them together, to bridge the gap between the Xylari fire and the human steel. But the energy was too great. It was like trying to hold a hurricane in a teacup. His mind began to fray, the white-hot agony of the interface burning through his consciousness. He felt another memory vanish. The smell of the rain in Montana, gone. The feeling of the soil in his hands, gone. "Elias!" A voice echoed through the fire. It wasn't a machine, it was a song. He felt a presence enter his mind. It was cool, like water, and vast as the night sky. Vespera. She had merged with him, her Xylari resonance wrapping around his jagged human thoughts like a silken shroud. "I am here," her voice sang in his soul. "Do not let go, Elias. Use my strength. Use my light." Through the connection, Elias saw her, not as an alien, not as a diplomat, but as a soul. He felt her curiosity, her loneliness, and the secret wonder she felt when she looked at him. He saw himself through her eyes, a small, broken creature who burned with a light more intense than any star. Together, he thought. He channeled the Xylari resonance through his neural anchor, smoothing out the jagged edges of the power. He translated the silver fire into something the human gravity anchors could understand. "Miller, now!" Elias roared, the sound echoing in both the physical world and the digital void. On the other side of the station, Miller slammed the manual override. The gravity anchors surged to life, grabbing onto the fabric of space-time with a desperate iron grip. The phase-fold engine pulsed, a wave of silver light erupting from the center of the station and washing over the Ouroboros rift. The rift screamed. The expansion stopped. The blackness was pushed back, the dimensional tear sewing itself shut under the pressure of the combined technology. Aethelgard groaned, the hull plating screaming under the strain, but it held. The station was shoved backward, out of the event horizon and into the safety of the stable zone. Inside the Cathedral of Light, the silver pool turned black. Elias Thorne's body convulsed once, his eyes rolling back in his head, and then he went limp. The cables of the neural anchor sparked and hissed, the interface ports glowing a dull, angry red. Vespera fell to her knees, her luminescence dim and guttering. She reached out for Elias, her fingers trembling. "Elias," she whispered. He didn't move. His breathing was shallow, his pulse erratic. The silver lines on his face had turned a permanent, ghostly white. Kraxos and the guards rushed forward, but Vespera waved them back. She pulled Elias into her arms, cradling his scarred head against her crystalline chest. She didn't care about the taboo. She didn't care about the Archon. "Wake up, you stubborn human," she murmured, a single tear of liquid light falling from her eye onto his cheek. "Do not leave me in a universe that is so quiet." For a long, agonizing minute, there was no sound but the cooling hum of the engines. And then, Elias's chest gave a violent, hitching heave. He coughed, a spray of dark blood hitting the silver floor. His eyes opened. They were no longer gray or brown. They were shot through with flecks of gold and silver, the mark of the convergence. He looked at Vespera, his gaze unfocused. He tried to speak, but his voice was gone, replaced by a low, vibrating hum. "Who?" he managed to whisper. Vespera's heart broke, 1,000 tiny fractures appearing in her obsidian skin. He had forgotten her. He had traded her name for the life of the station. But then, Elias reached up with his trembling, scarred hand. He touched the side of her face, his fingers tracing the patterns of her light. "The song," he whispered, a small, weary smile touching his lips. "I remember. The song." He didn't remember her name, or her rank, or the treaty, but he remembered the way her soul felt when it touched his. He remembered the grit it took to save her. Kraxos stepped forward, his violet light bowed in a gesture of profound respect. He didn't speak. He simply brought his hand to his forehead, the salute of a warrior to an equal. Aethelgard was safe. The rift was closed. But as Elias Thorne lay in the arms of the woman who had shared his soul, the cost of the victory was clear. The human who had fought the void alone was no longer the man he had been. He was something new, something broken, yet infinitely more powerful. He was the first bridge between two worlds, and though his past was a graveyard of lost memories, his future was as bright as the silver fire he had mastered. "Rest now, Elias," Vespera whispered, her gold light wrapping around him like a blanket. "The void is gone. I am here." And in the silent heart of the station, the machine and the soul finally found peace. The recovery ward of Aethelgard was no longer a tomb of white light. It had become a cathedral of shifting color. Since the convergence, the walls seemed to pulse with a low-frequency violet glow, a sympathetic resonance between the human technology and the lingering Xylari energy. Elias Thorne sat by the viewport, watching the repair drones swarm over the hull of the station like silver beetles. His left arm was no longer in a cast, but the skin was different, translucent in patches, revealing the intricate, glowing latticework of his reinforced nervous system. "You're doing it again, Elias. You're trying to hear the station breathe," a voice said. Elias turned. Admiral Helena Vance stood at the door, her uniform crisp, though the fatigue in her eyes told a story of 1,000 sleepless hours. She looked at him not as a subordinate, but as a monument, something sturdy that had been weathered by a hurricane. "It doesn't just breathe, Admiral. It hums," Elias replied. His voice was no longer a rasp. It carried a slight, melodic vibration, a haunting echo that made the air around him feel thick. "I can feel the coolant moving in Sector 4. I can tell you that the pressure in the residential ring is exactly 14.7 pounds per square inch. It's noisy in here." He tapped his temple with a silver-lined finger. Vance walked over, standing beside him. "The doctors call it sensory integration. The Xylari call it the gift of the rift. I call it a damn heavy burden for one man to carry." "How much of the past is left, Thorne?" Elias looked back at the stars. "Dates, facts. I know the names of the ships I served on. I know the serial number of my first sidearm. But the color of the sky on Montana, the way my mother used to sing, that's all smoke. The machine in my head didn't just save the station. It wiped the hard drive to make room for the emergency protocols." "We lost 500 men at the New Haven breach," Vance said quietly. "You saved 10,000 here. Every life on this station is a debt paid to those you couldn't save back then. If that isn't a hero's trade, I don't know what is." "I don't feel like a hero, Admiral. I feel like a bridge that people are still walking across. And bridges don't get to have memories. They just have to hold." The silence was broken by the arrival of Miller. The kid looked like he'd finally found his footing in this new, strange world. He carried a ceremonial box made of obsidian and gold. "Boss," Miller said, his voice brimming with a mixture of pride and genuine concern. "The High Council finished the proceedings. Vorik and his boys, they're gone, exiled to the dead moons of Velonis. They won't be seeing the starlight again for 50 years. And Kraxos, well, the big guy wanted me to give you this." He opened the box. Inside was a shard of pure, unrefined Xylari core crystal, shaped into the insignia of the Aethelgard security force. It glowed with a soft, steady amber light, the color of human sunset. It's a resonance tether, Miller explained, his slang slipping out in his excitement. The gears back in the Xylari lab say it'll help stabilize your zapped nerves. Think of it like a shock absorber for your brain. No more feedback loops when the reactor kicks in. Elias took the shard. The moment his skin touched the crystal, the screaming noise in his head dropped to a gentle murmur. The vibration in his voice softened. He felt a wave of calm wash over him, a gift from the very people who had once seen him as a biological glitch. "Tell the Archon I'm grateful," Elias said. "Tell him yourself," Miller grinned. "He's waiting in the observation lounge. He says he wants to discuss the joint patrol protocols. I think he's actually looking forward to working with a bunch of squishy humans, now that he knows we've got more grit than a sandpaper factory." Elias stood up. He didn't wobble. He didn't stumble. His body moved with a terrifying, fluid precision. He looked at Vance. "What's the status of the treaty, Admiral?" "The Federation and the Xylari Empire have officially designated Aethelgard as a sovereign protectorate. We're the first of a dozen stations, Elias. The phase-fold technology is being integrated into the human fleet as we speak. We're going to the deep stars, and we're going together." As Elias walked through the corridors toward the lounge, he saw the transformation firsthand. Human technicians were working side by side with Xylari engineers, their different languages blurred by the hum of translation spheres. He saw a Xylari child fascinated by a human's tablet and an old human veteran sharing a meal with a crystalline warrior. The friction was still there, the prejudice, the fear, but it was being sanded down by the shared trauma of the rift. They had almost died together, and that was a bond that no politician could forge. He found Vespera in the lounge, standing by the massive window where they had once watched the world end. Her light was a steady, warm gold. She didn't turn when he entered. She didn't have to. She felt his rhythm. "You are stronger today," she said, her voice a song in his mind. "The crystal helps," Elias admitted, standing beside her. "And the silence. It's nice to have a quiet head for a change." "The price was too high, Elias," she whispered, her golden eyes reflecting the stars. "I see the holes in your soul where the memories used to be. I see the girl you lost." Elias reached out, and this time, it was he who took her hand. His skin was warm, hers was cool, but the resonance between them was a perfect harmony. "I lost a girl I couldn't save," Elias said, "but I found a universe I could. My daughter, she was a light in the dark. If she could see this, if she could see people who used to be enemies holding hands in the void, she'd tell me I did okay. She was always the smart one." Vespera leaned her head against his shoulder. "We are a new story now, Elias. We are the fragments that stayed behind to build something whole." "Yeah," Elias said, a rare, genuine peace settling into his bionic heart. "A new story. I think I can live with that." 6 months had passed since the Ouroboros rift had been sewn shut by the combined will of two species. Aethelgard Station had grown. New rings had been added, glinting with the polished obsidian of Xylari architecture and the rugged titanium of human engineering. It was no longer a research outpost. It was a city, a beacon of what was possible when the stubborn refused to quit. Elias Thorne stood in the center of the newly christened Convergence Plaza. He was no longer the chief of security. His title was now simply the Warden. He was the bridge between the two administrations, the one man whose authority was recognized by both the High Council and the Federation. He was wearing a simple, dark uniform, the amber crystal pinned to his chest. He looked at a group of new recruits, 5 humans and 5 Xylari, who were standing at attention. They were young, their faces filled with the nervous energy of those who hadn't yet been broken by the void. "Listen up," Elias said, his voice carrying that strange, beautiful vibration that resonated in the listener's chest. "You're here because you think you're the best. You think you're strong or fast or smart, and you might be, but in the rift, none of that matters. The void doesn't care about your rank or your technology. It only cares about one thing: how long you can stand your ground before you decide to give up." He walked down the line, his silver-flecked eyes meeting each of theirs. "Some of you will see things that will make you want to scream. You'll lose friends. You'll lose pieces of yourselves. But you look at the person standing next to you. They are your anchor. If they don't quit, You don't quit. That is the only rule on this station. Do you understand? Yes, Warden, the 10 voices shouted in unison, a mix of human grit and Xylari chime. Dismissed. Miller, take them to the gravity tanks. Let's see if they can handle 2 Gs without puking on their boots. Miller, now a lieutenant, grinned and led the recruits away. He gave Elias a quick thumbs up as he left. You're getting better at the gruff veteran speeches, boss. Almost sounded like you knew what you were talking about. Elias watched them go, a small smile playing on his lips. He turned toward the agricultural ring. He had a tradition now. Every day at sunset, he would spend an hour in the soil. Vespera was waiting for him among the Montana clover. She had become the lead botanist for the station, using her resonance to help the human plants thrive in the artificial light. The garden was lush, a vibrant explosion of green and gold that smelled of damp earth and life. Elias knelt in the dirt, digging his fingers into the soil. He didn't mind the stains on his uniform. He liked the feeling of the grit beneath his nails. It reminded him that he was still made of earth, even if his heart was made of titanium. The new batch is promising, Elias said, looking up at her. They have a good teacher, Vespera replied. She sat down beside him, her mesh robes trailing in the clover. You have changed, Elias. You no longer walk like a man who is waiting for the floor to fall away. Elias paused, looking at his hands. I think I finally figured it out, Vespera. For 20 years, I thought survival was about holding on to what you have. I thought it was about protecting the past, shielding the memories. But that's not it. He stood up, brushing the dirt from his knees, and looked out at the sprawling station, then at the endless sea of stars beyond. Survival is about what you're willing to leave behind so that something else can live. It's not a defensive act. It's an offensive one. You don't just endure the darkness. You push back against it until you find the light on the other side. I lost my daughter's face, but I gave 10,000 other daughters a chance to grow up. I think I'm okay with the trade now. Elias walked to the edge of the biosphere dome, where the glass met the metal. He placed his hand against the cold surface. He could feel the station's life support systems humming, the phase-fold engines purring like a satisfied predator, and the heartbeat of the people within. He wasn't guarding a station anymore. He was guarding a future. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small dried seed, a sunflower seed from a human university on Earth. He carefully pressed it into a small patch of soil near the window, a place where it would get the most light. Growth is the ultimate defiance, he murmured. I spent a lifetime thinking that my scars were just marks of failure. Each one was a reminder of a door I couldn't hold, a person I couldn't save, or a world that had burned while I watched from the ruins. I thought that being human meant being defined by our limitations, by the fact that we break, we bleed, and we eventually forget. But standing here, on the edge of a new era, I realize how wrong I was. We aren't defined by our breaking point. We are defined by the moment we decide to keep going after we've already broken. Humanity isn't a state of being. It's a form of persistence. We are the species that hunts the impossible until it grows tired and gives up. We are the ones who turn our grief into fuel and our losses into a foundation for something better. I don't need to remember every detail of my past to know who I am. I am the man who held the door. I am the bridge that didn't buckle. And as long as there is a void out there trying to pull us into the dark, I will be the one standing in the gap, refusing to let go. We don't survive despite our weaknesses. We survive because we have the courage to be weak and still say, not today. Elias turned back to Vespera. The golden light of her resonance was so bright it almost looked like a halo. He took her hand, his thumb tracing the silver lines on her palm, the mark she had earned when she merged her soul with his. They were both different now, neither fully human nor fully Xylari. They were the first of a new kind. He looked out at the Ouroboros Rift, which was now a stable, shimmering gateway to the rest of the galaxy. Ships were already lining up to pass through. Explorers, traders, families. I wonder, Elias said softly, his voice echoing with the music of the station. I spent so many years carrying that anger like a suit of armor, only to realize it was actually a prison. I had to lose everything I thought defined me, just to find out what I was actually made of. It makes me think about everyone else out there. trapped in their own little wars, holding on to their old hurts like their treasures. He looked toward the horizon, his gaze piercing the distance. What about you? What is that one thing you've been carrying around? That weight you think makes you strong, but is really just keeping you from moving forward? If you had to trade your oldest, most painful memory for a chance to start a new story, would you have the grit to let it go? Elias squeezed Vespera's hand and stepped away from the window, walking toward the heart of the station with a steady, rhythmic stride. Behind him, the sunflower seed rested in the dark, quiet earth, waiting for the first light of a new sun to tell it that it was time to grow.